Welcome, everyone. My name's Amy McDonald. I'm the director of CitySpace. Welcome to our Curated Cuisine series, which is our monthly series, talking to chefs and food aficionados. How many of you here, this is your first time at CitySpace? Wow, great. I think it's because of this woman right here. Please come back. This is the last of for our fiscal year. We'll be starting again in September with Curated Cuisine again. So go to our website and WBUR events and see what we've got lined up for the fall. It's a great series. We have been so excited about having you here for months. She was one of my number one. Let's try and get her here. I don't know where to begin. She's a culinary historian, a college professor, cookbook author, journalist. She's written 15 books. She's won the James Beard Foundation Award twice, including the Lifetime Achievement in 2020. Her book, High on the Hog, was adapted to the Netflix series in 2021. She leaves on Friday for New Orleans to start filming part 2. How many have watched it? We could not have a more ideal interlocutor than Tamika Francis. She's a public health professional by day, but she's a food enthusiast, I would say, every other waking hour. Her company, Food and Folklore, pays homage to global food traditions, but with a particular emphasis on underrepresented ones. What she likes to ask us, and I love this question, what does home taste like for you? And I think I say for Tamika, it's eating goat. And her life passion is that we all start eating goat. And that may come up tonight in the conversation. Tamika is also a graduate of BU Food and Wine program, which is our partner in this series. They are the most wonderful partner. Thank you, BU Food and Wine. It's a great program. They have prepared this sweet bit of peanut brittle you enjoyed walking in, and there will be a couple of other savory morsels from High on the Hog as you leave tonight. In addition, Dr. Harris will be signing books. There are copies for sale in our lobby from our wonderful Brookline bookstore, our independent booksmith. With no further ado, Tamika.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you so much. Good evening, Boston. Good evening. I have one job this evening. Well, I have two. To speak slowly first, and to just make space for Dr. Jessica B. Harris to have a conversation with Boston about the amazing work that you've done. I would like to start by asking you the very question, what does home taste like for you?
Well, that would be a little interesting because there's home,
Okay.
and then there are other places. So home would be my childhood home with my parents, and that's the home I'm never going to get to taste really again. So that's the thing that makes me cry. We're starting out there, so it's not going to be a good evening, y'all. Home tastes like my mother's food. And my father couldn't cook at all. I mean, he wasn't, he was not even I'll toss a hamburger on the grill guy. He just didn't cook.
Okay.
But my mother was actually a trained dietitian. She went to Pratt in the 30s.
Wow.
And had an AA degree in dietetics. So I grew up eating well, and it was the old school, it needs to have color, and you need to have a protein and 2 vegetables and a salad and all of that. So I grew up eating that way, and it was wonderful. And what I miss more than any particular dish is the communion.
Mm-hmm.
It's that part of home. And I think that's really what it is for everybody. We can take the food out of it.
Right.
It's the thing that happens over the food. It's the sharing. It's the being family.
Yes.
Okay, and when you get to my age and you are single and don't have any children, that's the thing you miss the most.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, if you want to talk about food, I'm never going to taste my mother's fried chicken again. I have given up on macaroni and cheese because I'm never gonna taste hers again.
Yeah.
Secret.
Tell me.
After my mother died, I discovered in the back of her freezer a bowl of macaroni and cheese. Oh no, it gets worse. I still have it. She's been dead for 20 years, and every year at Thanksgiving, I take out a little bit and eat it. I'm probably gonna die from it, but I have my mom's mac and cheese every Thanksgiving. So, you know, there are those tastes that you just know you're never gonna get back.
Yeah. We love to ask that question, and you completely answered that question. I invite the audience to ask your colleagues and your friends, but also if you have questions for Dr. Harris, go to Slido and enter Curated Cuisine. We'll invite your questions into the conversation.
And I'll avoid them.
So Dr. Harris, tell me about your inspiration. What brought you to this work? What brought you to this place? How did you get here?
Accident.
Okay.
I think a lot of people your age and out there are big on intention. You know, I set my intentions once a week, and I don't. I don't think my generation dealt with intention in that way. We had goals and we had all sorts of things. I don't think we set intentions. I had the great distinction. You want to talk about pressure? This is pressure. On the 14th of May, I had to give the graduation address at the college that I went to. That was pressure. But what I did was I spoke about the difference between intention and purpose.
Same.
Because I don't think we think about them. We set intentions, but sometimes as you move along in life, you find your purpose, which may have nothing to do with your intentions.
Okay.
Now, that's to bring you back to how I did this, or whatever this is. My intention was to be a college professor.
Okay.
And I certainly did that for, God help us all, 50 years. That's 50. Want to see my stripes? It was fascinating. I loved every minute of it. But it was not my purpose. This seems to be my purpose. Difference between intention and purpose. Your purpose finds you. Your purpose sometimes will smack you over the face when you least expect it. That being said, how did I get into this?
Right.
By accident. Totally by accident. In the 70s, I graduated from college in 68. Don't count. And I became a part of a group of people who had, some of whom had gone to my high school. We were all fresh out of college in New York City, you know, feeling the vibrations of the Black arts movement, all of that. We started to, one of the group had found a newspaper called The Black American, and we proposed to the publisher, who was a gentleman named Carl Offord, to take the middle section of the paper and turn it into a journal for Black arts.
That sounds powerful.
Well, after about 3 months, I realized I was the only one still writing. They had moved on to different things, and you know, their careers took them other places. I was teaching, because all of this was done, I need to stress this, all of this was done while I was teaching full-time. You know, so this was up until about 3 years ago when I retired, my hobby. But with those articles from that, I went to actually a magazine that was called Encore Worldwide News and World Report or something like that. It was published by Ida Lewis, who had been the original editor of Essence. I wrote for them. I did book reviews. I did translations. I speak French, and she did a lot of stuff with Jeune Afrique, so I would translate from the French to the English. took those things and traded up, if you will, and went to Essence. And at Essence, I became the book review editor and then wrote features.
Yep.
And then became the travel editor.
That sounds fun.
Remember, I was teaching full time, so I could only travel so much.
It's your side hustle.
Yeah, yeah. The side hustle that becomes your side. But so with all of that, I ended up doing the travel.
Yeah.
And then once, when you work in editorial, they sit you down and once a year because, they have to talk to advertisers and talk about what they're doing and stuff. And so once a year, they sort of say, okay, what are the places you think you're going? What are the things you think you're going to do? And we tried to frame it, and then I don't remember if I did or they did, but we came up with the idea, food and travel. Mm-hmm. And so food and culture and travel, because it's essence. And so in the 70s, I was the gourmet. And every other month, I would travel somewhere in the world and write about the food of that place. Now, it was Essence, so I was going mainly to what we now call the African Atlantic world.
Right.
And then my mouth started telling me things. That tastes like what you had about 2 months back in that place. Why is that connected to that? And then, my academic brain and, that crazy mind started working. And so things came together. Flash forward till the early 80s. At this point, I am working on my doctoral dissertation and finished that and have managed somehow to get a literary agent who says, what do you want to do? Well, maybe I'll do a cookbook. I had no idea what that meant. So I did a cookbook. It was called Hot Stuff, a cookbook in praise of the piquant. It came out in 1985, I think. Before you were born, don't go there. But
I was 3.
well, there you go. Okay. Thanks. But then after that, it was like, okay, it sold, reasonably well. They wanted a second book. It's like, well, what would you like to do? And I wrote a book called Iron Pots and Wooden Spoons, Africa's Gifts to New World Cooking. I now know that it was neither the iron pots, which were certainly not from Africa, nor the wooden spoons, which, while they are certainly made in Africa in infinite variety, but Africa's Gifts to New World Cooking were different. But that was the book that started the journey.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're launching your career in the culinary history space. Can you talk a little bit perhaps about if your mother's influence being a dietitian may have brought you there in some way?
Oh, it's real simple. I live my mother's life.
Yeah, say more.
No, she probably would have delighted in sitting up here. Maybe even more than I do.
Yeah.
But no, my mother was an extremely talented dietitian. She was an extraordinarily inventive cook. And she had a much better palate than I do. She didn't get the chance. In fact, I frame my cookbook covers.
Right.
Well, up until, I don't know which one, but I've got several framed cookbook covers on the wall in my kitchen in New York. And there with them, I have a letter that somehow managed to survive. My mother was so talented that when she was at Pratt, her professor had proposed that she get a job at the Brooklyn Union Gas Company demonstrating stoves. Mm-hmm. Because at that point in time, people were going over from wood stoves to gas stoves and so on and so forth. And somehow or other, the letter that was written back to her teacher survived, and it says something to the effect of, "We're delighted that you recommended Rhoda Jones, Mama's maiden name, for this position. However, we are not in the habit of hiring Negro small n girls for these jobs because it would be impossible to tell which houses are the Negro ones." Okay? She didn't get a chance. So I do this for her
Yeah.
and for all those other folks who didn't get a chance as much as I do it for me.
And thank you for your work. I call you my patron saint of culinary arts.
Bad church girl, bad church.
So it sounds like you started to write cookbooks, start with picante, with peppers. Now you're moving into the African diaspora. Take us to High on the Hog. Take us to that book. It was around 10 years or 11 years ago. Take us to the work that brought you there.
All of it. I mean, ultimately, High on the Hog is, people sort of say, how long did it take to write? My life up until
Wow.
2011. That's how long it took to write, because it's an accumulation of things. You know, it's all of those essence things. It's all of the education things. I mean, because part of what I do, if I do, is the research,
Yeah.
is that academically formed mind that then, you know, you read something that's like, well, how did that happen? And then you got to read something else. And then that leads you to something else.
Right.
And, you know, you tumble down the rabbit hole, and I have been down a whole lot of rabbit holes.
Yeah.
So it's that kind of thing that makes High on the Hog. You know, who were those people? Some of it, because I didn't write it as an academic text, although the next time I do something like that, I'm going to keep my footnotes for myself, even if they don't get published. I don't remember necessarily where I got them, and I have a pretty good memory.
Okay.
But I mean, the gentleman who was the African-American farmer who gave, and I've forgotten what the exact gift was, but he gave gifts to the Confederate soldiers departing from Appomattox of food. Powerful. But it also speaks to the African-American engagement in the totality of American history.
Right.
So that's part of what the High on the Hog thing is about. It's like, let's look at that. Let's sort of, you know, scratch away and see what we can come down to.
Yeah, thank you. The series, or the book and series, talks about Hemans and Hercules. Are there any other unknown or unknown folks you're thinking of? Chefs, culinary artists, farmers that you want to lift up?
Oh my God. There are too many to name.
Okay.
And there are, in addition to those too many to name whose names we know,
Right.
5 times that number, or an infinite times that number of folks whose names we don't know. Y'all get down to New York City. There is a show at the Museum of Food and Drink, which is located at the Africa Center. It's called African/American: Making the Nation's Table. And its centerpiece is a quilt with 500 quilt squares.
Okay.
A square for each, year, theoretically, not necessarily chronologically ordered, but a square for each year from 1619 to 2019, when the show was scheduled to open. And each square represents an African American and food, or a foodstuff that was brought by African Americans or nurtured by African Americans. And there are 400 of them. And there is then a virtual quilt online where people can go and enter, because this is the kind of history that is being discovered every day.
Right.
You know, what I knew 10 years ago, 11 years ago now, when High on the Hog was published, and what I know now. You mentioned Hercules.
Right.
When it was published, we didn't know his last name. His last name was Posey. He took the name of his owner before George Washington. We also know that he probably, after he escaped, went to Philadelphia and hid in plain sight.
Right.
And they may have found his burial spot. So, and there is a young lady named Ramin Ganeshram that some of you may know, who is actually probably right now got a fellowship, and she's studying at Mount Vernon, and she will undoubtedly come up with more. So this is not a field that is closed or static by any means.
Right.
It's ongoing every day. Something new turns up.
Great, thank you. So we know that you write a bit about the enslaved and their stories, so Hercules and others. And there's an audience question here. How does food and cooking and aspects of our humanity transcend the evils of the world? How does our commonality or humanity or shared humanity of food?
I think, the bottom line is food is an essential part of the human condition. If we don't eat, we die. It's real simple.
Yeah.
We all need food. Now, when and if we begin to share food, it's sort of like the Indian namaskar, the God in me salutes the God in you.
Yes.
When you share food with somebody, you are certainly in some way acknowledging their humanity. If you share it with them, if you give it to them, thrust it at them, otherwise dismiss them by the giving of it, that's a different thing. But when you share food with people, you have created a bond of some sort. I don't know about you, I have a very hard time eating with people I don't know, and an even harder time eating with people I don't like. Okay? So, the church saying amen. But it's like, no, we have to do this.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe, let's just make it a quick meal. But when you get to sit down and deal with what someone told me the word is commensality, the communing together over food,
Right.
that's a very special bond. That's something you can't really break. And when you share that with somebody, you each leave with a little piece of the other person, and that's important. It may be Pollyanna-ish,
Yep.
but I think if more of us actually could sit and share, we'd be better for it.
You're right. Thank you. You're so right. Can I stay with High on the Hog for a minute and just kind of talk about the work you've done around like pre-Columbian foods, for example?
I've done work on that?
But foods that came, food from African Diaspora before they came to the New World, so to speak. We know many things came across in the Columbus Exchange rather. So anything, potatoes or yams, we talk about these.
That's because you got that basket under
I
there.
do, and I'm trying
Show
to
the
cue it
basket,
up.
girl.
Oh my
Show
gosh.
the basket. Just show the basket.
I was trying to cue it up.
No,
I wasn't doing
show
it?
the
Okay.
basket. Just show the basket. Let's get into it.
I feel called out. I appreciate it.
You should have known.
So Dr. Harris does a lot of work. Okras, watermelon, like so much amazing food that has come across. And apart from goat, I like to talk about yams. And I found your work when I was trying to explain to someone that the amazing thing I had at your Thanksgiving table last week is a...
Sweet potato.
No.
It's a funny looking sweet potato. What's wrong with that?
It's a favorite. And this would be?
Well, I call it a boniato.
Boniato. Batata, anybody?
Mm-hmm.
Batata?
It's a white sweet potato, but let's finish with the yam and then I'll get back to the boniato.
No worries. So this is a yam.
That's a sweet potato.
Does anyone differ?
Nobody differs except some growers in Louisiana at some point decided to market a type of sweet potato as a yam.
As yams.
But also understand transference.
Tell me.
That thing that you haven't shown us yet.
My favorite thing. It doesn't look good. It's a yellow yam.
Okay, and we couldn't find a knife that was up to cutting it. So,
Right.
Because it was like, you got to cut those things open, otherwise they just look like gnarly
Usually
things.
it looks like sunshine.
Yeah, yeah. The yam is old world in the sense that it is native to, and people will disagree with this,
Of course.
Africa or Asia. Okay, it's not necessarily only Africa, but it comes from old world.
Right.
Sweet potatoes are new world. So that when, and there's so much confusion about the back and forth, but when the Africans who were enslaved got here, and yams are important, I mean massively important in the area, Ghana on down to Nigeria.
Right.
People eat yams. There are yam festivals. New yams grow from old yam shoots, so they sprout, and you plant those. So it's death and resurrection, so that they have religious meaning
Right.
as well. So they are very important, major food stuff. But you get here and you don't have them. But you do have sweet potatoes.
Right.
So you call that thing you have by that thing you miss. Sweet potatoes become yams. And that's my theory on how it happened. I'm sticking to it.
I don't have a theory, but I know in Jamaican Creole, yam is to eat.
No. Well, we were talking about the Gullah Geechee.
Right, and my family's maroon, so to
Well,
yam.
yam is to eat. Yam
to
your
eat.
food.
It's
Yam your
yam.
food.
You yam your food.
No. Gullah Geechee chef named Matthew Rayford just came out with a book this year called Breast and Yam.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Bless the food and eat. Breast and yam.
Right.
So yeah. But the connections between the Gullah Geechee and Jamaica, you're still discovering. So I'm gonna let you find those out.
I'm still uncovering. I'm still finding my way. My grandfather cultivated yams, so for me it was a surprise. And I like to say, I mean, as I'm becoming American, I'm learning the American foodways, and so your work has been very useful in that regard. So yes, I wanted to lift my basket up. Thank you for allowing me to pull my basket out.
Well, lift your basket up one more time.
Yes, please, of course.
No. No. Yes. Y'all are calling it a batata.
Batata.
I know it as a boniato. And therein lies one of what I think is going to be my pet project when I get through with the 5 pet projects I got to get through before I get to the next pet project, which is, I think that the food of the African Atlantic world needs a lexicon. Because we don't know what we call things.
Right.
Okay? What is it in, first of all, English, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Papiamento? Let's just start with those colonial languages.
Right.
Okay, then let's talk about the Creoles. But then let's take it all the way back to the Latin. Because if you want to get into it, you got to deal with botany. And the botanical names are Latin. So it's the difference between the Discoraceae species, that,
Yes.
and the Ipomea species. No, that. Yeah. They're different genus.
I'm learning.
Different genus and species. It's not the same plant.
Are they both tubers?
They're both tubers.
Okay, but different.
Different genus and species. So once you get into the botany, you've got ways of actually deciding what they are.
Right.
You know, because sweet sop, sour sop, all the Annona families, when you get into the, I'm trying to think of something that I can do in a couple of languages, but I'm not getting it, so I'm going to let it go.
Yeah, right.
But I mean, you know, it's, well, even just in colonial languages, pineapple, piña, abacaxi, Portuguese, and I can't think of whatever else, but they actually originate in the Caribbean, which people don't know.
How about sorrel or hibiscus? Roselle, I think it's called.
Flor de Jamaica
Was right.
in Mexico, Carcade in Egypt, Bissap Rouge in Senegal.
Okay.
So you've got but I mean, if we could start learning those things. So those of you who teach culinary, get your students to work on something like that. And then,
Right.
maybe we can all put it together and end up, because I think that that's part of the claiming it,
Right.
is if you can't name it, if you talking about yam, yes, we know it's nyame, that's fine, or it's inyam in French, or it's, what is it in Portuguese? Nyame, I guess. If we can't communicate over that, then we're already at an impasse. So just to be able to have some kind of a text that would enable that communication to start could then start larger communications and maybe even cross-cultural discussions. Because the one thing that happens to us Africans in diaspora in this hemisphere is we're still, in many cases, limited by our colonial languages.
Right.
So until we start to at least learn our colonial languages, then we're in trouble because we can't talk to people. That'd be that abakashi coming in there going, what?
I think my last one is allspice and pimento.
Mm-hmm.
So allspice, pimento is allspice, but I believe it was called so by the English colonists who thought it was similar to all the spices. That's the story I heard.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
because it supposedly has all of that.
Right.
But then there's a difference between pimento and pimiento,
Right.
which is another confusion to people. It's like, that's that red thing that goes in olives,
Right.
but it's how you spell it. So there's also that aspect of it as well.
Right. Thank you. We have another question. So is there an ingredient that you found in your research that has such a cultural importance that without it, we wouldn't be the same people? Ooh, that's a big question.
Well, probably no. I mean, I heard somebody go rice.
Yeah.
Yeah, rice would do it, but I have been told that my vegetable totem is okra. So I would go with okra almost more than rice because, excuse me? The question was, without which we would not be the same people.
Okra? Okay.
Asian rice. Plenty of people eating rice
Right.
who are not African.
But rice, man.
I'm not denying the importance of rice, but that
okra is-
was not the question.
Yeah.
Most of the folks who eat okra have had some touch of Africa.
Yeah.
And that's why I would vote for okra.
You're correct. Of course.
I know. You just need to be convinced, that's all.
So while we're on okras or perhaps other ingredients, what do you think of the association of particular food and holidays?
Well, I think that's part of that human condition we talked about earlier. I mean, we celebrate, we have holidays, we have celebratory foods.
Right.
They are different. They are different depending, again, back to the colonial influences. But in some cases, they are atavistic almost. Hop and John. Hop and John on New Year's Day. Mm-hmm. Okay, Hop and John, African American black-eyed peas and rice.
Right.
Now, some people cook the peas with the rice, some people cook the peas without the rice. But if you take Hop and John, expand it, and go back to holidays, rice and pigeon peas, mm-hmm. Christmas in the Caribbean, Rio Pois Congo. All right. Call somebody's name, okay. All right. Arroz con gandules. Mm-hmm. You've got all of that. And the thing is that with all of that, it's always holiday.
Right.
It's always, you may have it every day, but it's particular for holiday.
Correct.
And so when you start to talk about those holiday foods, those are some of the things that will call you out. That Christmas ham, which might be lechon, okay? Which might be, I remember spending, just pre-Christmas once at a girlfriend's house in Guadeloupe, and I kept hearing thump, 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 and I wondered what it was. They were hacking up the pig. You know, it was like, okay. So that whole notion of that, even, you know, down in the South, in Cajun country, which has an incredible mix of things. I'm not claiming this is African, so don't misconstrue. Hog killing time is in the winter. Certainly in the South because it's cooler.
Right.
Okay, so you get all of those things that obtain, but that then begin to give you your holiday foods.
Can we talk a little about hogs? I mean, the book, the title, High on the Hog, as John, I believe, moved up on the hog. But the importance of pork and the hog, in especially those who were enslaved, and as we move on, how important was the hog?
You mean swine? It was very important. First of all, the thing that's interesting is pigs are not native to this hemisphere. So pigs were brought here. There you go. Yeah, pigs were brought by the Spaniards. And the thing becomes that, that because they proliferated, because they are, you know, they eat swill. So they can be raised with swill.
Right.
The southern saying is, you know, you eat everything on the hog except the oink from the rooter to the tutor. Mm-hmm. So they are cost effective.
Right. Yeah.
Therefore, you could take a pig and do things like, you know, master gets the ham and the pork chops and the spare ribs and the this, that, and the other, and the feet and the head and the tail and the ears could go to somebody else, namely the enslaved.
Right.
So you've got all of that down to and including the chitlins, which they do eat also in Africa. I've had goat chitlins. There's a dish for you. You know.
But it sounds like the hog was important as you moved up, you know, your social status or economic status, the higher up, literally. That
well,
hog
yeah, you don't want the
symbolic.
feet, you want the ham. It's real simple. High on the hog. Not the feet, the ham.
Gonna move up, okay?
Move up.
I have another question for you. Is there a region in the world that has outsized culinary influence on the U.S.? What culinary region should have more influence?
Well, I don't think that there is a culinary region that has had more influence on the foundational food of the United States than Africa, although Africa is not a culinary region. You know, it's continent, so there's a lot of different stuff going on. But when you start to think about that, yes, we've got France.
Right.
Okay. Yes, we've got Italy. We have the Dutch, whom we often forget. The Dutch have had an incredible influence. Waffles, pancakes, cookies, coleslaw, coleslaw. So we forget the Dutch, but the Dutch have had a profound hand in things. The Spaniards.
Right.
And basically, I'm working on a book that I promise God and whoever else is listening, I'm going to finish before this week is out, that is about the foundational food of the country. And so, obviously, Native American food that we are only just beginning
To scratch, yeah.
to for want of a better word, discover, which is a word I don't like using in terms of anything Native American. We're beginning to sample. Let's leave it at that. European Americans, specifically the Spaniards, the British, the French, and the Dutch, and African American, mainly from the western parts of the continent, the areas from Senegal down through Congo. And I would say, arguably, that region is larger, and probably because of the nature of enslavement, has had a wider influence than any of the others.
I mean, this might be my observation, but I think we're just uncovering or sampling still how much came from that region to America.
You think?
We still have work to do. We still have work to do. I have no questions here, so I'm going to keep talking. How about that?
Okay.
How about tell me a story from some of your travels, like some of the most influential, like meal you've had or place you've been to that really stands in your mind as a story you want to share.
Oh, goodness. I've traveled a lot. I mean, more than most folks. And I've traveled more often as a traveler or a visitor than as a tourist. And
How do you differentiate the two?
I was getting there.
Okay.
I make a distinction. I make a very real
Yes.
distinction because I think that, travelers want to in some way mesh with the culture. They want to understand it. I realize that, my idea of a good trip is sometimes if I've got a friend, I'll just go sit in their office. I don't have to go to a museum. I don't have to get on a bus tour and drive around and say, ooh, look at that. Some of that is because when I was in my 20s, I did that. So I don't feel the need to do that now. But some of it is just because I'm cranky and I really want to know what's going on. And the best way to do that is to be with the people who are there. So I have friends in these places. One of the things that sustained me during COVID was being able to pretty much, when I was up at 3 a.m. because I couldn't sleep, I could call my friends in France or speak to my friends in Africa or talk to the friends in London. And then as it got late, I'd hit the Caribbean and Brazil. And finally, it was like, okay, 12 to 12, I got some people I can call in China, And so I could feel still with the circle of friends. But I say that to say that the meals have been, in some cases, simple family dinner. Back in the year 1970, probably 5. Don't tell me how old you were then.
I was.
Okay. I went to Senegal. I think it was my second time in West Africa. And my first time alone in West Africa. And I went with a girlfriend or met up with somebody there that I didn't know all that well. We were acquaintances in New York. But we went to the office of Air Afrique, which was a French-African airline. And we're talking with the person who was the head of it. And he was astounded that I spoke French so we could actually communicate, and we had a good time. And finally he said, "You must come home to dinner." And it's like, I subsequently learned he called his wife who said, "I ain't cooking, so where are we going?" And so what we ended up doing was going to a restaurant called Chez Mbaye, which at that point was out on the water on the outskirts of Dakar. And its specialty was spit roasted lamb, not goat, And they would bring the lamb to you and you would pull off the pieces. It was like a meshwi, but very much like a North African meshwi. But you're sitting there with your feet in the sand and eating this incredible, succulent lamb that has been cooked to a turn. And I'm sitting with the man who is Théophile Comaclo and his wife, Théophile and Théodora, and my girlfriend and I, and we were having this meal. And I'm a Pisces, and had just bought a charm that was a Pisces charm. And at some point in the conversation, Theodora said that her birthday was the 15th of March. And I said, oh, mine is the 18th. And I took off the charm and gave it to her and said, you're a twin. And so twin in French is jumelle. Mm-hmm. And so we have called each other for the 30 plus years of friendship since that day, wow. Twin sisters. And that was a very important meal. It was a very simple meal, but I know all of her kids. They call me auntie. I mean, she is my sister as much as anyone. I told you earlier, meal in Jamaica. I learned to eat boiled green banana.
Yum.
Not, boiled green banana and boiled liver. Nah.
Iron
for
rich.
Breakfast.
Breakfast of champions.
Because the bananas had all fallen off the tree after Hurricane Gilbert, which I spent at a girlfriend's house in Jamaica. You were 6.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
So another memorable meal, another memorable meal. But I can talk about meals that I've shared with sisters in Brazilian candomblé house. I can talk about, being at, there are lots of them. There are too many to note, but there's at least one or more per continent.
Thanks for sharing your story of your twin sister. We have a question here about the history of pork and other meats in the African American culture. And what are your thoughts on the transition of Black people towards veganism?
I don't think it's a transition. I think if you begin to think about it, there are a lot of things that happen. First of all, the traditional African diets. Remember now, I've said African, so that's a gross generality. Mm-hmm. But many of the diets of the continent are plant forward. So it's not necessarily, oh my goodness, it's so new. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It's something that's always been there. Yeah. What is happening on the continent, as what has happened here, is we're eating a diet of post-enslavement prosperity, not post-enslavement prosperity, obviously, on the continent. But here, when you didn't have meat,
right,
and you couldn't get meat, if you could, you piled it up. Right. So we're eating and considering that diet to be the traditional diet. Right. I opine, love that verb, I opine that was not the way it was.
Right, yeah.
So that we're eating something that is a new development, relatively new development. Right. Mm-hmm. All of those greens and things before were not seasoned with, 5 ham hocks and yesterday's leftover ham. Okay, that's one thing. Also, factor in labor. Okay, farmers who work the land eat differently because they need that, because that hefty plowman's breakfast that they talk about in England. Right. If you're getting ready to go out there and hit the plow, or if you have already hit it and are coming in to eat breakfast before you go out to hit the back 40, mm-hmm. Then you need that nourishment. very different from if you're getting up, sliding into your little Mercedes to drive off to wherever. You don't need that to sustain you. Yeah. So we're eating a laborer's diet and not doing that kind of labor. So it's those two things at work.
Yeah, definitely. And also remember, there are some cultures, I dabble in Rastafarianism, that have traditionally eaten, low or no meat diets or no plant or animal based. So that exists in the African diaspora as well. Yeah. I have another question for you around who would you love, this is a pivot to something different. Who would you love to have at your perfect dinner party?
My mama, my daddy, anybody else who wants to show up. I've had the great good fortune of eating with, some of the noted people of the 20th century. I've eaten with James Baldwin. I've eaten with Maya Angelou. I've eaten with Toni Morrison. I've eaten with Julia Child. I've eaten with Edna Lewis. I've eaten with Leah Chase. I'd love to see them all.
At your welcome table.
Actually, that was what Jimmy called his table in the south of France.
That was your podcast. I used to listen to the table.
I also wrote a book called The Welcome Table, and it's an old church song. I'm going to sit at the welcome table.
I don't know it yet, but I'll find it.
But
what are you serving?
Baldwin had a house in Saint-Paul-de-Vence, and he had an outdoor table with beautiful tall cypress trees, and he called it his welcome table. So it was the church reference, because of course Baldwin had been a boy preacher.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah. What am I serving?
Yes.
Oh, my mama's gonna make mac and cheese.
A little bit, just a little bit.
I don't even know. It would depend on who's coming.
Okay.
It would depend on who's coming.
Yeah. So I've heard that you frequent the farmers market during the summer seasons. And this question has to do with the significance of celebrating a good harvest and how that influences holiday traditions.
Well, I think it does, but we've got what is arguably and has now become a very problematic holiday, Thanksgiving, which is basically a harvest celebration.
Right.
That's pretty much it in the U.S.
Right.
We've got, Christmas, but harvest is long past by Christmas. We've got Easter, which is the beginning of things, that sort of first fruits of the spring. But the only real harvest festival we have is that. As far as the farmers' markets go, I am a market junkie.
Yeah.
I have been I have been in markets on 4 continents and in most of the islands on the Caribbean. And I'm waiting to get to the next one. In fact, Wednesday, I'm traveling on Friday, but I may go to the farmer's market on Wednesday just to do a walkthrough. I love markets. I think it's the Greek word agora. They are the place where you find yourself. It's where you get the news. It's where you get what's going. It's all of those things are part of the market. And that's what I love about markets.
Great, thank you. So we have a last question. As you talk about harvest and Thanksgiving, do you think food can bring together a polarized or polarizing country? What's the role of food currently?
I don't know what can bring together our polarized country. I wish I did. I like to think food might, but you have to convince someone to sit with you before you can share food. we're back to where we started about sharing food and eating with people that you don't necessarily want to eat with. So you have to figure out on both sides how to suspend that long enough to come together to maybe discover some form of communality. And I hope we can do that. Because if we can't, we're in bad trouble. And that's not how I want to end this tonight. So come up with
No, I have another one. No, absolutely not. So many of the folks here in this space are food enthusiasts. I dabble between being a home cook and a restaurant, a chef, so to speak. What's your advice for folks in the culinary space, folks who are budding, folks who are trying, traveling, working? What's your advice for?
I think there's probably never been a better time to be in the culinary space. I mean, because we're hearing from voices that were previously unheard from. We are seeing people being lifted up and having opportunities that perhaps had not been available before. We're seeing possibilities. I mean, people are going, well, I don't have to have a restaurant, but I don't have a pop-up, So, and the pop-up often leads to a restaurant.
Yes.
I mean, there are so many other avenues that are opening. I mean, it is a very exciting time to be involved in things. And there's so many other food roads that we are discovering. Everything from, degrees in gastronomy, who knew? I mean, all the way through to people making things. We're talking about, when I say making things, I'm talking about pickles and chutneys and fermented things and cheese and all of the stuff that folks do. And in some cases, we've always done it, but we are now able to, because of one good thing from social media, the ability to merchandise and market in other kinds of ways. And I think that that's very important and very positive.
Yes.
And so that's a positive note to end on.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Aris.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for coming. Very quickly, it's the WBUR fundraiser month. Not that I need to pitch for WBUR. We're not doing any on air, but we are. There's a QR code that we can put up here. We still have to make our goal by June 30th. So if anyone's inspired or listens to WBUR, do go to WBUR.org to donate, or you can have a QR code here. It's somewhere, and we can donate. This is our last week of the fundraiser. But more important, go outside to the lobby. Jessica will be signing books, and we have a couple of more delicious morsels to taste. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.